Mickle and Jeff, we'll get started talking a little bit about the play, and maybe at first we can start talking about that stage direction in Chekhov's play that they are trying to recreate. Jeff, Mickle, when's the first time you ran into the play The Cherry Orchard and its famous, mysterious stage direction of the sound?
Should I try? I think I was directing a scene from the Cherry Orchard in school in the late 90s. I was in a graduate school at University of Washington, and I think that's the first time I heard the not just the stage direction, but the anecdote that Stanislavski was completely befuddled by how to direct it, how to come up with it, and Chekhov supposedly uh, actually did say how nothing could be simpler. It's such a simple direction. Why doesn't he understand this? I just remember noting that and thinking that was kind of funny. And then I think it was maybe half a decade later when I was writing the play or when I was trying to come up with an idea for a play I remembered that. So that's my story.
I've never actually read The Cherry Orchard. That's a that's a
That's
true
not
thing.
a,
I'm an Uncle Vanya. Yeah,
it's a good play. You should. You
yeah,
should,
I just never really got into The Cherry Orchard. It wasn't my thing. I'd read Uncle Vanya, but I had never read it. And then when I was doing Hunchback, Beethoven had never read it, so I just didn't bother to read it.
So I think part of the chemistry that makes the play so interesting is that you've chosen, Mickle, two characters, one real and one fictional, but what they have in common is they're both deaf, and they're trying to recreate a sound seemingly only conceptually at this point because they can't really hear it to know. Could you maybe talk a little bit about that idea?
yeah. I think as I mentioned to you guys before when we were just a couple days ago talking about doing this, is that this play is 17 years old, and it's difficult for me to remember exactly what it is that I was thinking. So just any answer I give, just think of it in that context. I think their deafness was kind of an incidental fact to me. I was more drawn to put them together because they both seem related to me somehow spiritually as two sort of brooding, romantic, isolated figures. They come into the or Beethoven dies, I think, in 1825 or so, around the same time that Victor Hugo is writing uh, Notre Dame de Paris, and coming up with that character. It's so they felt closer to me as personalities and as sort of theatrical soulmates in some way, and the deafness almost became like an accidental joke. I don't really remember. That wasn't a driving impulse behind. It almost felt like, how am I going to? I don't remember.
I will say, having been involved in a lot of productions of your plays with Catastrophic Theatre and having done a number of talkbacks with you, it seems like that's somewhat often the case, is that something that ultimately, at least to me, seems quite important about the play is not the thing that you were originally keen on, at least as you can recall. And so I'm
Yeah,
really interested in those sort of accidental things that sort of become brilliant, but were not a core part of the original idea.
I I think I think that's pretty much every playwright's process. It might be just more obvious in my case is that you're trying to jam things together that don't seem to fit on at first blush, and your job is to try to make them talk to each other and make them relate. And so how I so that's my process anyways, is to try to put things in the room together that I feel relate to each other on some level that I only can feel, and then I work through as best I can to try to make them live together as a as a play, and that's so the order in which things arrive, like that they're deaf, or that it's about Chekhov's Cherry Orchard, or that Emily Dickinson has something to do with it, or that it's in variation form, or that it's in panel discussion form. All those things didn't arrive at the same time. It's an accumulative thing. I can still remember I'd worked on this thing, this short play. I'd worked on it, like, it really was agonizing for me to work on this for about a year, and nothing was coming together. I knew I wanted to write something about these two characters and doing something with them together. And I had the idea of Quasimodo living in this hut in the marshes, and I don't know why I was drawn to that. I don't remember, but I do remember the day I sat down at my desktop at my computer and realized it was a panel discussion, and those first lines came out of Beethoven's mouth, and what a relief that was. Just this relief of, oh, that's how it's all going to fit together somehow. And before that, nothing fit together.
I've noticed in talking to people who are in an arts sort of working environment or in an academic working environment that the conference setting is something that really tickles people, because those can be so stilted and sort of manufactured that I'm now going to sit in front of a small room full of people and discuss my findings of my artistic process or my scholarly work or whatever. And so I wonder if you have any comment. And Jeff, the next question I'm going to get to after that is about the rehearsal process, if you want to start thinking about that. But Mickle, this idea of a group of people seated at a table, whether it's 2 people or like Spirits 2 and 4, 12 people who are here talking directly to an audience. I wonder if you have thoughts about that, because it shows up in a number of your plays, Small Ball, etc.
Yeah. Well, for this play in particular, I think I've talked with Jason about this before. There's something about the panel discussion, especially with theater people, theater artists, where it's a kind of clearinghouse, or this sort of neutral no man's zone, where you can come as a theater artist, regardless of the success or failure of your play, to talk about the play. And it's kind of this palate cleanser in a way, where people who have just, it often happens post production, right? So you've had a play, and maybe it's been a big hit, or maybe it's been a big flop, but the panel discussion afterwards, or the post show discussion, is this oddly very low stakes play. So it's almost anti-theater in that way. It's a sort of the opposite. So we've done this very dramatic thing, and we've all acted, and we've sought your applause, or your laughter, your tears, for a couple of hours, and you've paid good money for that. And now that the lights have come down and the curtains closed, we're going to come out and do the exact opposite of that, and be very calm and very non-dramatic and very low stakes, and just sort of natter on about things that are not very important in regards to drama and to our world of theater.
Which cycles us back to some of the things that Chekhov brought to the theater.
Such as?
Well, talking about things that are not necessarily overtly dramatic.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. I mean, but his famous thing is that you have this family sitting down to dinner, just an ordinary family, and they're not talking about anything in particular, but their lives are falling apart underneath it all. And that's maybe why a panel discussion, or a post-show discussion, or theater artists talking about their work, like we're doing now, strikes one as Chekhovian, because it's a sort of patina of placid, low stakes chatter over a great deal of heartbreak and tragedy.
Thank you. So I'll also note again to everybody listening in, feel free to phrase your questions, your comments in the chat, and I will just read them as we get them. I don't really intend to be the sole asker of questions, this evening. So again, just go to the little speech bubble and type in a question, and I can read it out loud, or I guess we can all see it, so I don't even necessarily need to. But Jeff, the next thing I want to talk about is this production in particular. And it doesn't necessarily need to be anything particularly complex or profound, but what do you remember about rehearsing this particular play?
Well, I remember Greg and I have known each other for a really long time. We've been working together since we were very, very young. We've known each other since high school. We both loved the play. He had kind of hit me to it, and then I had read it, and then, of course, I'd loved Mickle's stuff before. So when we decided to do it, if I remember, Greg didn't really come in with a whole lot of preconceived notions about what this was going to be like. Well, there's a lot of trust in both of us, and we just knew that we're going to sit down in a room with the stage manager, and we're going to work on this play, and it's going to be okay. But we didn't really come in with, this is the way it's going to be, and this is the way we're going to do it, and this is how it's going to work out. It took a lot of reading and talking. So we read the whole play because it's 40 minutes long. So most of our rehearsals, almost from the very beginning, were just reading and talking, reading again and talking, reading again and talking. It just kind of compounded upon itself as we went through time. I think the things that I remember the most, getting towards the performance, because it was mostly me and Greg and Tony Tidwell, who was our stage manager, were the only people in the room for the entire rehearsal process. So before we go up opening night, we're going to do the play. We didn't really know what we had. Right? Every time you do plays, there's a lot of people around. You're getting some type of semblance of how this play is going to go. You get some type of vibe. And Greg and I have done a lot of plays, but this was one where we were a little bit, I wouldn't say concerned, but we just didn't know. We didn't know how this was going to go when we did the opening night. And I think some of this you were talking about earlier, about this panel discussion where it's kind of theatrical, but it's this panel discussion. When that audience comes in for this particular piece, and it is that type of environment of, it is a panel discussion, yet it's this theatrical device. It was the thing that had been missing through the rehearsal process, and everything just kind of exploded. We were just ecstatic that the work that we'd done was correct, or for us at least. And when we got it in front of the audience with that element of that panel discussion, the audience being there and being that third character was pretty profound for both of us. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, no, Jeff, it does. A thing that Tim mentioned, and I'll ask this, and then I've got a question from Rebecca, who directed a production in Hamburg, and I'll get to that next. But one thing that does heighten the play and create theatricality in the Catastrophic Theatre version, certainly, is the Quasimodo makeup.
Yeah.
Which is on the the poster image. It's the first thing you really notice as the play is beginning. And can you talk a little bit about again, you probably weren't in the room when Greg was developing it, but the impression it made when it was incorporated into later rehearsals and then also in performances. Because it's very striking.
Yeah, he was bringing that stuff in pretty early. Actually,
oh, really?
If you know Greg Worthington, he's very physical. He likes to have the costumes and the props and the things. And he was bringing these things early. I was bringing things from my house to make the sounds. We were trying a million different things, items to bring in to make the sounds. He was bringing different things for the face from very, very early, playing with because he's such a great actor with those things and mask type work. So he was bringing those in pretty early, which obviously had a lot of comedy for us whenever he tried. I mean, so I think the very first thing he brought was just like a clown nose. It wasn't even like Quasimodo. It was just things that he was sticking on his face to start working with that and what that was going to do to especially our relationship as we're working across the desk. But he brought that in pretty early, if I remember correctly.
And as a follow-up, and this is really, Mickle, for both you and Jeff, that collection of objects at the very beginning of the play it makes such a great first impression because it lets the audience sort of figure out that all of these things, what all of these disparate things have in common is they all make interesting noises. Could you talk a little bit about the assembly of those objects?
You want to go, Jeff?
Oh, you go ahead first, Mickle, please.
Okay. Well, when we first did it, I pretty much left that up to my. I played Beethoven in the first production, and
I think we have 3 Beethovens here tonight, Mickle.
oh yeah, it is. Oh yeah, great. But I pretty much left it up to my castmate, Colin O'Reilly, who played Quasimodo. He's a musician as well, and a pretty inventive guy. And so I didn't really have it. I knew he would bring in a lot of delightful stuff, and I just enjoyed that process. And I agree. I didn't know when I first, I didn't think of this when I first wrote it, but over the years and seeing that opening moment, it usually does start with Quasimodo coming out and comes out first and takes stuff out of his bag or bags. Is just a really fun moment to see a person opening a bag and bringing stuff out. It's like Santa Claus, right? It's present time. It's fun. It's a good way to open a play, I think, as it turns out. And yeah, so that's there was no rules. I mean, that's the other good thing. Anything can come out of that bag, and that's what makes it exciting as well. How many bags did you guys have? I don't remember. Was it 2 or 1? It seemed like that Greg had. Was it 2?
I think he had a couple of bags that he was carrying.
Yeah.
But interesting story on that with that opening sequence of pulling those things out. On the second production that we did with University of Houston, I actually had to come on. It was a bigger auditorium, and I had to come on at a different, very far away from Greg. At opening night, I didn't get a call, or I wasn't quite sure when the play had actually started because I was off stage and Greg was walking in. Of course, he has that sequence where Joe was off stage for a while and then he's setting up his stuff. But I had really no idea when he had walked out on stage, when he was there, how long he had been there, because we had that worked out with the sequence of events of when Beethoven would enter. But I really had no idea. So I was sitting there trying, and I could hear the audience kind of respond, but I didn't know exactly where we were. And apparently, according to Greg afterwards, I had waited pretty much a full 5 minutes. Too long and I was like, oh, Greg, I'm so sorry. I couldn't hear and I didn't know. He's like, oh, I wish you'd have waited 5 minutes more. Because it was such a joy for him to do that sequence at the top, and it was working so well.
Yeah. It's often when companies approach me about doing the play and they worry, their first worry is it enough to do as a single evening?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you really milk that first.
You just like, I could have milked that all night. It didn't matter when you come in. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I want to now move over because, again, Rebecca, who directed the production in Hamburg a while back, put it in the chat that she was interested in the anti-theatrical nature of the piece that we were talking about earlier. And Rebecca, if you wanted to turn your mic on, actually, I'm sure we'd all be a little curious to know a little bit about that production, actually. It's kind of cool to have folks involved in 2 different productions on 2 different continents on the same chat.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So my colleague Martin, who played Beethoven, is here as well.
Beethoven!
Should he turn on his mic?
Sure, yeah.
I see that he's, I don't see him, but okay, so Martin, you can turn on your mic maybe. I can't see him on the camera. So, okay, there's about a million things you all said where I was nodding my head because I thought, yeah, exactly. So I'll address the anti-theatrical. It's something that kind of arose as we began to rehearse it. We had the same experience that we came to the play and all loved it and felt an immediate attachment to it, but kind of weren't sure what to do with it.
Right.
Which for me is the appeal. You know, if I know what to do with the play, I actually don't want to do it because 6 weeks is a rehearsal process where I'm trying to figure out why I'm attached to something or why it's compelling to me, a bit like Mickle
Right.
said, with writing a play. You don't always know rationally, but it touches you or it moves you and you're trying to figure it out. So that, I think, was the process for all three of us. There's Beethoven, looking very brooding and Beethoven-y. And one of the things that for me was very important was this notion of just having two people listen to one another. That's particularly funny because they're both deaf, but they're responding to one another. So at some level, they hear each other. So that was one aspect. And another thing was they're in a panel discussion. So they're sitting next to each other. And that means for two actors, they're not really directly involved with one another. And they're forced to listen more than they are forced to physically engage. And we had the added, we decided early on with Quasimodo's makeup that it was going to be minimal, but it was just going to be one eye. And it was actually the eye, I think, a bit closer to Beethoven. So if he wanted to turn to look, the actor really had to like turn his entire body with this hump. So for me, what you had on stage was everything that you're always told in acting school or in theater not to do. You know, you're always told there, pick it up, don't have such a long pause, you know, pick up your cues. You know, it looks so awkward you turning or stepping like that just to get to the next person. And here, you know, and there's a table right in front of you. You should never have a table in front of all your actors and set design. And no one's moving, there's no action. So all of this for me became a directing motif, this anti-theatricality, and I put all my focus on the nature of what it means to listen to someone. And I instructed my actors really to listen, not to pretend to listen because you know the text and you know what's coming up, but every night to really listen. And watching them listen to each other was a fascinating experience for other people because when you're listening, your body is still expressing, you're still taking in, but it's much more subtle. And I also told my actors just on the last point that when they really listen, there are these kinds of incredibly natural long pauses because people are trying to take in what they've been hearing from their counterpart. And we found, Martin's laughing, there were times when my two actors who are great listeners and who have no anxiety about having to keep the show moving just took enormous amounts of time. And those were the nights where the audiences were most with us. And were either laughing, they were nervous and anxious, but then there was the cathartic moment when a comment came, but they were incredibly attentive. So that's what I mean by this anti-theatrical is stripping away kind of everything that we normally have in theater just to focus on the act of listening and to really deep listening. And this deep listening is the point. It doesn't matter if they're deaf. There's a profound sympathy or understanding beyond just the kind of physical act of listening.
Yeah. I have a question, Rebecca, for you. So about the eye being, for Quasimodo to look at Beethoven would require some effort.
Like it required a lot of effort. He also had a hump.
In our production, and I think that there's a question when I did it, I made a point of never, we made a point of never looking at each other until the moment of, I don't think you've ever even read the Cherry Orchard line, right, in whatever scene that's in, 8, I think. Was that you, Jeff? I watched yours, but I don't remember. Yeah, did you have a similar thing? Or
we did, and I think that was the moment we came to as well. I can't exactly remember, but I know that we have those discussions at length, right, to when that moment was, and I believe that was the same moment we came upon as well.
And Martin, did you have a similar? Rebecca, was it's just interesting to me just that because it's not in the stage direction that you're not allowed to look at each other. It just was for some reason. Yeah, Martin.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, it's true. It's almost inevitable we didn't talk because of Rebecca's setup with the eye and makeup as well. And I had to this moment just now, we were rehearsing this online Skype version of the show, right? And it was a complete shock to me to see suddenly in front of me my co-actor looking at me just like centimeters away from my face. So different that I'm not sure it'll be the same show at all.
I think we had discussions about the extent and kind of interaction they were having. So of course listening was very important, but I like to give actors a lot of carte blanche as a director. I come from acting myself, and I didn't want to put them in a straitjacket. And I trust these actors enormously, and they owned their characters. So throughout the rehearsal, I asked them to explore what felt right for each of them. And I found that there were times, it was very minimal and very limited, the times they looked at each other. But when they did, part of the humor and joy of it is Beethoven moves very freely. Beethoven doesn't have a hump on his back. He doesn't have a problem with his eye. So when they looked at each other, the impulse seemed to go from Martin or Beethoven. And some of the sadness or tragedy was underscored by the difficulty with which Hunchback would even have to turn to look at his counterpart. And that underscored for me too, this kind of joke about, Beethoven comes and crosses the marshes with ease and no problem and shows up at the hut, kind of uninvited, I think. But we never hear about the Hunchback leaving. There's something very grounded about him and earthy. So I gave Beethoven or Martin, I think, had a little bit more freedom to move and look.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. I'm gonna go to the chat now because we do have some questions, and I'm just gonna go in the order that they were received. Some went to the whole group, some went just to the organizers, so not everybody will see every item in the chat. So this is from Rachel, who asks about the starts and stops, right, about the variations. Were those intended to represent new days, wandering of the mind, something else? So that's question one, is sort of what's the representation of ending and beginning with a new variation, how to interpret that. And then a question for Jeff, are you able to respond to Quasimodo and vice versa about the conceit of them both being deaf? So how did they both know what was being said if the conceit's that they're both deaf? So Mickle, if you could tackle question one, and Jeff, if you could tackle question two.
Sure.
I really like that first question because I don't know how to answer it. I think it's a really beautiful question, though. I didn't think of it as any time passing at all, except the moment between the two the blackout itself is the amount of time that has passed, in my mind. But blackouts, the funny thing about blackouts is that any amount of time can pass inside of them. But there's nothing in the text itself that tells you how much time has passed, obviously. So I love that it could be a whole new day or a whole wandering off of the mind, is how she puts it. I think that's what I'm going to stick with. I think it's a wandering off of the mind. That's all. So that seems good to me.
Yeah, I think I can only speak for Greg and I on the death, and we had a lot of discussions in the rehearsal process about that and what that would mean to the performance, to the characters, and how that would actually be presented in the show. And ultimately, we came up with that we weren't going to do anything about it. That this is something that Mickle has put in the play, and it is something that is. It is it's just a baseline of what is. So we accept that as what it is, and then we play the play. We didn't worry about playing deafness or anything to do with the deaf, because the way it's written and the way Mickle has worked this ingeniously Anything that we do to try to highlight those types of things just detracts from it, at least for us, when we were working with it. We found that it wasn't working for us when we tried to do things like that. So we just let it go and let it just be with what it is as it was written. Beethoven states that they're deaf multiple times, and that is just something it is. And that's just what we did. That's how we played it.
It brings up the interesting distinction between a theatrical conceit and then something that is simply a fact of the world of this particular play.
Right.
And it sounds like instead of making a conceit about it, which meant that you would have maybe had to think through it, discuss it as an idea, you simply took it as a given, which is an interesting thing from a rehearsal, standpoint. But I think that also plays quite differently. In other words, we would know as an audience, had you treated it like a conceit to be discussed or as simply a fact to be taken at face value.
Right.
And isn't that a conceit? I mean, so there's a conceit where an actor is deaf and they play deaf, and there's a conceit where an actor is deaf and they play a person who can hear, and that's what the conceit is. So it's just you can have any sort of conceit in the theater, right? So you say, if you have good actors like Martin and Jeff and Greg, they can offer up this ridiculous conceit to the audience and say, do you accept this? And the audience is very generous in saying, yes, we do. Usually. Usually people don't get hung up on that. So.
Good. Well, the next question in the chat has to do with the cherry orchard. I'll take the second one first. Jeff asked, should he have read the cherry orchard?
Jeff Dorkin, one of my oldest friends,
okay.
Highly influential to me. This play would not have been possible if I didn't know him. So he's just fucking with us.
Good to know.
Yes, Jeff has read the cherry orchard, and he should have read the cherry orchard. But this Bobby's question above that is pretty great.
Yeah, so Bobby's question is about the structure of the cherry orchard, and did that play start to creep in more and more into Hunchback Variations as you were writing it?
Yeah. So Liggo's arc and Beethoven's arc, I think, are pretty standard arcs. Actually, you start off with a person who doesn't know something, and then they learn something about themselves, and then that impacts them. And I have to say, Jeff plays this moment really well. Is that it is in that scene of should I have read the cherry orchard is so well done in the tape I was watching. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to see their actual production, but I watched the video. And if you go and see how Jeff handles it, I think he says that line, should I have read the cherry orchard 3 times in that scene, and each time he falls through a different level of the basement, the sub basement, and then down into the earth. And that's where the play actually sort of becomes a kind of a sort of typical play, in that you have your hero or your main guy have this kind of crushing realization, and I wish Greg was here, because I can't remember if we had a conversation about that or not, or if you guys just figured that out on your own. But it actually, I didn't. To tell the truth, when I was writing this, I think I was just more by instinct. It was only later when I was playing it, or some years later, when I realized, oh, that's actually this pivotal moment, and that's what actually makes it sort of more worthwhile to me personally.
Yeah, I know that Greg was definitely having some email conversations with you during the rehearsal process, because he'd share some of it with me.
Yeah. I think so the other thing about this play is that it was also turned into an opera, and retained the text, and Mark Messing, a composer I've worked with a number of times, made this brilliant piece out of it. And that's when I think we really, when you extend the language out through song, through singing, and through music, every moment becomes even greater. So Rebecca talks about the deep listening and really trying to draw the audience into that through pauses or just through taking your time and really listening to the other person. That happens necessarily with opera. Every single syllable is drawn out. So that idea of that structural point especially was extremely heightened and became the great sort of operatic moment of that piece. But it didn't alter to be honest, it did not alter my perception of it during the writing rehearsal process. Way I looked at Chekhov during this one, it was just more the feeling of Chekhov, not his structural brilliance. It's more I was looking at 19th century authors, in particular, Emily Dickinson, Victor Hugo, of course, and Chekhov, 19th century, a little bit into the 20th century. Matthew Arnold, other people. So it's more the feeling of 19th century, both poetic authors, romantic authors, and then Chekhov. And so it was more. I was trying to more get the guts of the spirit of Chekhov into the play rather than the actual sort of structure.
Excellent. There are some other great questions in the chat. I'm going to keep going in the order that they came in. The next one is from Martin, who wants to ask about the balance between humor and seriousness, and notes that some audience members seem to take the play as pure comedy. Others are almost literally in tears. I'll add that I had an experience in watching the video earlier this week where I was laughing right up until I was crying. And so if you want to talk, and just as a note about just the catastrophic theater, that's sort of in many ways the hallmark, is that a person laughing will be sitting next to a person crying, and they're reacting to exactly the same moment in the exact same play.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's also Chekhov, right? Famously. Yeah, I want people to laugh. But I find I do pretty bad work when I try to write funny. If I sit down and go, I'm going to try to really write a scene that's really funny, it usually fail. So with this play, it was I tried to take it. Just try to take it as seriously as I could, given circumstances of it, and yeah, I don't have much to say of any great.
Well, I'm reminded of the line from Beckett's Endgame that we quote in the Catastrophic Theatre rehearsal rooms quite often, which is, "Nothing is funnier than unhappiness, I grant you that."
Right. Yeah, I suppose so. I was making myself laugh when I was writing it. I think that more out of relief that once I got into it, once I discovered the panel discussion and variation format, I just had a good time writing it.
I think I'd say that, at least in my experience of the performances that I've done of it, I mean, every audience really, yeah, it's got some funny, and but every audience responds very, very, it's different. It's not, we never really knew. We loved, I mean, Greg and I, this is one of the few, we've done a lot of plays together. This is one of the few plays where we can talk about, oh, remember the first night at U of H? Remember the second night at Catastrophic? Remember closing? The very specific audiences, the feel of what those audiences were doing and how they were engaging with the play and reacting to the play was very, very specific and different. Of course, all audiences react different. We all know that as actors. But I mean, for me, and I think I can speak for Greg, with the Hunchback variations, it was even more palpable because it's such a short, intense piece, and you can just, because of its length, maybe because you're sitting there facing the audience the whole time. Maybe, I don't know. But the individuality of each audience seemed to be even more for Hunchback Voracious than a lot of plays that Greg and I have.
The next question, and this did not go to the general chat, but it's a good question, comes from Marianthi, who asks, is the Chekhov stage direction a real quandary facing theater scholars, directors, actors, practitioners? Have people written papers about this mysterious stage direction, etc.? I will put on my theater historian hat to note that yes, it is. It's been much discussed. I had a student in our master's in theater studies program write her master's thesis on what have been termed by people over time to be impossible stage directions that are so essentially contested that it's impossible to get them fundamentally right, or rather to fundamentally perfect, because they're basically contested always. And so, yeah, this is not just for the scholarly community in the theater. It's become sort of a legend, right? This thing that Mickle was talking about at the beginning of the chat, that Chekhov thought was very straightforward, and Stanislavski was, really puzzled by. And so I think part of it has that patina of, well, if it was puzzling to Stanislavski, then it's puzzling, then there's something interesting and potentially tricky there. I don't know if Mickle, you want to elaborate on that any further.
No, that's about it. No, yeah.
But yes, a real thing that is a real point of discussion in the theater, and has been for 100+ years.
And I guess I would just say that there's plenty of stage directions that playwrights have written, like Rob says, that are impossible or weird or mysterious. But usually the playwright will cop to that and say, they're doing it out of whimsy, or they're doing it because they want to, challenge the director in some impossible way. But Chekhov really seemed quite sincere in his befuddlement at Stanislavski not getting this straightforward stage direction. To him, it was so clear in his head exactly what it was. So it's just one of those odd, funny things.
Wonderful. The next question comes from Greg Cody, an actor in the Catastrophic Theatre Company. Hi, Greg. Who wants to ask about Jeff's delivery of the line, "That is not the sound," and how it seems both the same and different each time, and asks about what it's like to have something close to a catchphrase in a play like this.
I don't know. I think that particular line, changed night to night. I mean, it was how the audience was responding, how the audience was vibing on the show, and how that would go. And I think sometimes that's not the sound. There's kind of an obvious, it would land funny if it was done right, but then it kind of shifts to where it shouldn't land funny. I was really dependent upon how the audience was responding to in the moment of those particular lines, and in that situation for that particular variation. So I'm not really quite sure how to answer that. It was just it would be different every night.
I think Greg Cody is, he's sort of, so Greg, if you didn't know, if you came in late or not, I also played Beethoven. We have another Beethoven here too. My experience in reading that line as the play progresses is one of dread, because of that catchphrase quality. Because the first two times you say it gets a laugh, and then as it goes on, is it going to be grating and wearying? Right. Is it going to seem like just a gimmick? But I think that Jeff's right in that you have to approach it as that Beethoven does have an arc in the play. He is getting increasingly further into, he's being swayed by Quasimodo's pessimism to a degree, and he's so the line itself should have an arc. So it shouldn't feel like a catchphrase. It should, after a while, begin to be the same line, but have a life of its own, have a journey of its own, I guess.
Martin, as our third Beethoven, do you have anything to observe about That Is Not the Sound?
Well, it's most of it's been said. Absolutely, I agree with all this. That it is one of the hardest lines in the show. And when we did it at a festival in Antwerp that was adjudicated, it appeared um, that this was one line that I had difficulty projecting into the audience. It often was a throwaway line and didn't come through. And I can only say it's probably because I was increasingly puzzled by it, and it wasn't something that I wanted to throw out to the audience, but it was something that I was trying to understand myself and working through it, even during a performance that was in otherwise extremely successful. But it's a hard line to work on, and I couldn't say at this point how it relates to the arc. But then maybe that's a question for Rebecca to answer.
Good. I'm glad.
Hard,
Go ahead.
hard to say. I knew it's a line we discussed over and over again. And the interesting thing is we did this originally, 11 years ago, and we struggled with it. And it was a constant discussion. And then amazingly, when we were asked to do this 11 years later, I was stunned to discover we're having this exact same discussion 11 years later. So life and experience and returning and reading the play had not answered the question for us, which is kind of fun and frustrating, which is kind of the Quasimodo experience, I guess, returning and returning and returning and seeking an answer and not getting it. So that was kind of funny. And I actually think in some ways the comment was about volume at the festival, if I remember, but in terms of the actual feeling and meaning of the performance, I think the puzzlement is exactly what needs to be. It worked because it was genuine for you as an actor, and it could be genuine for the character. So I didn't have an objection to the puzzlement. I think allowing yourself as an actor to be open to what the text is creating you in the moment is what makes it real. I wanted to say one thing to Mickle's point. I think that's really interesting about Beethoven. I never saw him as being sort of slayed by Quasimodo's pessimism. I think because he's not a fictional character, we almost took it as his natural arc of a life and dissipating power and the sadness and awareness. You know, life's tragic. So this was a great and extraordinary creator. He has this wonderful variation where he says what it's like to be me, to create and to master the unknown, which Hunchback never can do. But you can't always do that as an artist, and it's very arbitrary, as you said yourself. You don't know what comes and why it comes and when, and that can be maddening. So I kind of thought this tragic realization was Beethoven's dissipating powers to master what he once knew he could.
Yeah.
He never has.
Right. I think it's as simple as that. I mean, I think he begins the play as an optimistic genius and believing, having faith that they're gonna get there eventually. And then this is a question on the side here. So what's the realization on Beethoven's part? That he may have missed an opportunity for creation, that he failed perhaps to see something in the concrete real that Hunchback lives every day. Yes, I think I'm not sure, maybe Jeff can speak to this better, but it's in that variation 8 where he says, would that have helped? Do you think, should I have read the Cherry Orchard? Is the first time where he thinks maybe I didn't do all I should have to contribute to this collaboration. And it's that and it makes so much more sense as an actor if you take that moment of doubt, that's the first real doubt that he feels about his abilities, or his place in the world. And that's all. I mean, it helps me through the rest of the scenes to do that. And it's hard to make sense of the rest of the play for me as an actor if I don't take that moment in. God, I'm making it sound so. It's like yeah. So the realization, I mean, you can phrase it differently. I think that's a good, that he missed an opportunity for creation. Absolutely. I think that it's, yeah, that the failure now is certain. And I don't think he believed that before. I think there was somehow, he was going to somehow transcend space and time and pull everything together somehow through some brilliant stroke. And it's that moment that he realizes maybe that's not going to happen for him. And everything that he's collaborated with on this particular project is going to lead to a big zero, um, and a nothingness, and that's going to overwhelm everything that he's created himself.
So, with my moderator hat on, we are close to an hour into this. I received one more. It's sort of in the middle ground between a question and a comment, but it's so wonderfully specific and honestly a little bit weird, as the commenter noted, that maybe we will wrap up with this. And I'm just gonna read it. So the frame here is. Well, the question is, Mickle, are you familiar with the 1970s television series for kids, The Electric Company?
Oh yeah, I was a big fan of The Electric Company.
Okay, me too. Yeah, I remember it as well. So here's the question. That is not the. It's really, I guess, a comment. That is not the sound. Reminded me of a short bit that was on The Electric Company when I was a kid called The Plumber. The plumber knocks on the door. The woman who lives there is not home. Her parrot is there. The parrot, doing what they do, responds to the knock with, "Who is it?" in the woman's sing-song voice. You see the plumber go through this whole range of emotion as he answers, "It's the plumber. I've come to fix the sink." And this is flashing me back to it. So he says, "This is the plumber. I've come to fix the sink," with all of these variations. After the second time, "That isn't not the sound" was said, I flash back. It amazes me that maybe this was somewhere in the mix of your subconscious. I know I'm paraphrasing. And anyway, the plumber answers again and again.
Hello? Can I hear you? Can you hear me? Hello?
It appears he may have been cut off.
Oh, but can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. I think Rob may have just gotten a little bit cut off there. Man, but I was loving what he was talking about, because I flashed that too. Looks like he's coming back.
Okay. If I fade it out, the gist of it is this plumber saying, "I'm the plumber, I've come to fix the sink," is talking to a parrot and has to say the line over and over and over again.
So there's that, yes. And now that you recall that to me, I remember that. Also, during that same time in the 70s, I was listening to two comedy albums in particular, Cheech and Chong's, their album with Dave's Not Here, the famous Dave's Not Here sketch, which is very similar to the parrot sketch. Anyway, you can Google it. Cheech and Chong, Dave's Not Here Man, and the Monty Python's Cheese Shop sketch, which is based off of an improv of how many different ways you can say, "No, we don't have any cheese," or "We don't have that particular type of cheese." So that those three things I would say were rattling around in the background. So I think it's probably a pretty typical comedic form to have, a repeating line, "Who's on first?" whatever. That becomes either a catchphrase or is built upon in some way, right? But that's a great. Electric Company was awesome. I loved it. They're by far the best theme song of any children's television programming. There's
now a link to the sketch in the chat if anybody wants to take a look at that. We did sneak in one last question under the wire, and this is again from Rebecca, about friendship in artistic collaboration. She says, "To us, this was an odd one, but a compelling and increasingly real one. Beethoven was maddening to Quasimodo, but also meaningful for him, reminding Quasimodo of futility, but inspiring him as well to continue to search. So since we actually have a lot of friends who know each other through artistic collaboration, maybe that's a nice note to end on. Mickle and Jeff, if you have any thoughts.
Yeah.
You go first, Mickle.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that, yeah, I don't have much to add to that. That's just a very nice thought. I mean, it is, I think it's a play that theater people in particular can relate to, because we're all have been in maddening collaborations with ourselves and with each other before. So, oh, Big Bamboo. Yeah, Jeff Dorchen. The Big Bamboo, the Cheech and Chong album. Sorry. Yes, I will say it was. The other thing that was a background to this was that I had worked on a collaborative Hunchback of Notre Dame, an adaptation of that. I was hired on by Red Moon Theater, which is a big puppet spectacle theater in Chicago. Sadly, no more, but they were the big spectacle theater puppet troupe in town, and they had commissioned me to be the writer to help with their very large spectacle puppet adaptation of Hunchback of Notre Dame. And so I had been working on that. It was in the end a successful collaboration, but very fraught one. And so Quasimodo was on my mind quite a bit. So this play sort of came out of that immediate collaboration towards a difficult thing. Yeah, so that's, that's important background there. Yeah, Rebecca, Garen, do you want to I want to plug, because thank you very much, Catastrophic, for putting this together, and especially putting that beautiful video of your production online. It was just, for whatever reason, when I posted it, a lot of my Facebook friends really enjoyed it, and I think it brought some relief to people in these difficult times. Rebecca's her production is they're going to do an actual live thing, right, online. Do you have a link to that, or a plug, or it's Couch Theater?
Yeah, we're gonna first of all, I thought the film performance at Catastrophic Theatre was just fabulous. The filming as well, just great. So thank you for sharing. I've been telling everyone here in Germany who we know to take a look at that performance. I hope you keep it online for a little while. Takes a while for things to get over here, even with technology. We're going to do a live online type Skype thing, and for all kinds of technological and other reasons, we realized this is going to cause us some difficulties we don't yet feel we can master. So we have decided it won't be live, but it will be recorded. Right. It's going to be a recorded Skype discussion between the actors, and we've made some minor adjustments with Mickle as well. So it's not an attempt to do the theatrical performance, but
so where can people go to
the conceit is the Skype. They're actually, Beethoven and Quasimodo are going to meet on Skype basically. And
right, so the name of the theater is through Couch Theater.
It's Couch Theater. The English spelling of theater, theatre.org. And I think it should go up in about a week. We're still trying to work out some technical issues. It's new for us too. Mickle, I'll write you and let you know, and then you can
All right, I'll around. So watch my Facebook space.
Exactly.
I'll plug it.
Yeah. Thank you.
So once again, thanks everybody. And if I could ask for one last little gesture, if you've been listening in this whole time and you feel like turning your camera on just so we can see some faces of who all was listening in, we're at the end, so we don't need to worry about our bandwidth or anything. But it might be nice for everybody to at least to give a wave and to say goodnight.
And if you feel like making a contribution to Catastrophic Theatre, that would be.
Yeah, Shayna, if you want to put in the chat how people can make a little contribution, feel free to do that.
Sure.
So yeah. I see some faces. That's really cool. Hi, everybody.
Thank you so much for joining.